She was the chef everyone admired for her skill, yet when she said, "Try a taste," I realized the only flavor I craved was her. The first time I saw her, she wasn't trying to be noticed. She was moving gracefully behind the counter of her restaurant, focused on the simmering pans and the chopping board in front of her. The kind of focus that belongs to someone who's poured years of herself into a craft, until it's no longer just a job but an extension of who she is. The place was small, tucked on the corner of a quiet street, glowing with warm pendant lights that softened every edge. The tables were set simply, but everything felt deliberate, like she had designed the restaurant to hold people the way her food held flavor, with care, with patience. I'd stopped in because I was hungry, but as soon as I sat down, hunger took on another meaning. I found myself watching her. The way she tied her apron at the waist, her sleeves rolled neatly to her elbows. Her movements weren't rushed, but precise, elegant. Each cut of the knife, each stir of the spoon carried a quiet confidence. She wasn't just cooking, she was creating something she believed in. When our eyes finally met, it wasn't with the polite glance of a chef acknowledging a customer. It was steady, almost curious, like she wondered why I was still looking at her when the dish in front of me was more than enough to hold attention. A smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "You're staring at my food, aren't you?" she teased lightly, walking over to my table with a small plate in hand. The scent reached me before the plate did, rosemary, garlic, butter still melting across the surface. I chuckled, leaning back in my chair. "I'm not sure if it's the food, or the person making it." Her brow arched, amused, though I could see a flicker of surprise pass through her eyes. She set the plate in front of me, her hand brushing against mine for the briefest second. That small contact, it startled me more than I expected. There was warmth in her skin, a steadiness that contrasted with the spark of electricity it sent up my arm. "Try a taste," she said, tilting her head slightly, as if daring me. The words left my mouth before I had time to think. "Only if it's you." Her lips parted in the faintest breath, and though she quickly masked it with a soft laugh, the silence between us thickened, weighted with something unspoken. I wasn't trying to be bold. It was playful, yes, but there was truth tucked inside the words. She lingered a moment longer than necessary, her eyes meeting mine with a steadiness that almost felt like she was testing me. Then, with a shake of her head, she walked back toward the kitchen. But I noticed the faintest color rising in her cheeks, as though my reply had settled deeper than either of us expected. I looked down at the dish she had placed in front of me, but suddenly, food was the last thing I wanted. Because the flavor I craved most wasn't on the plate. It was in the woman who had just walked away. I hadn't planned on staying. It was supposed to be a quick dinner, maybe a polite compliment, and then I'd head out into the night like any other customer. But somehow, I didn't leave. The hours slipped by, and I found myself still there, leaning casually against the counter while she cleared tables. The restaurant had slowly emptied, the gentle chatter of diners fading until only the soft clink of glassware and the low hum of jazz playing in the background remained. She glanced over her shoulder at me, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "You know, most people eat and leave. You're still here." I shrugged, trying to play it off. Maybe I didn't want the night to end just yet. Her laugh was quiet, unguarded. She carried a tray of glasses past me, close enough that her shoulder brushed my arm. That small contact was nothing, really, just the natural closeness of two people sharing a space, but it left a warmth that lingered even after she stepped away. "Since you're so determined to hang around," she said, setting the tray down, "you can help me." I grinned. "That's dangerous. I might break something." "Then be careful," she replied, handing me a stack of plates. "This place is my life. Every dish, every glass, I've worked too hard to lose it all to clumsy hands." I carried the plates to the back, following her lead. And in that simple task, stacking, wiping, moving in rhythm beside her, there was something unexpectedly intimate. No crowd, no noise, no distractions. Just the two of us, moving in sync. The silence wasn't awkward. If anything, it was comforting. I found myself studying the details I hadn't noticed before. The way a loose strand of hair escaped her bun and brushed against her cheek, the faint crease at the corner of her eyes that deepened when she smiled, the way her laugh seemed softer when it wasn't for the whole room, just for me. Eventually, she leaned against the counter, exhaling deeply, as though the weight of the day had finally caught up with her. Running a restaurant, it's beautiful, but it's exhausting. People only see the end result, the food, the atmosphere. They don't see the hours, the sacrifices. Her voice carried a mix of pride and fatigue. And beneath it, something else. Loneliness. I dried my hands on a towel, then turned to her. And yet, you still give it everything. That says a lot about you. Her eyes lifted to mine, steady and searching. For a moment, she didn't say anything. She just looked at me, as though trying to decide whether I really meant it, or if I was just saying what she wanted to hear. Finally, she let out a small breath and smiled. You're different from most. I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't need to. I just knew that in that quiet restaurant, with the scent of flour and roasted herbs still hanging in the air, something had shifted between us. The night was no longer about food. It wasn't even about staying late. It was about her. About the way her presence filled the empty space. About how every brush of her shoulder, every glance, every word drew me closer without either of us moving at all. And though I didn't say it out loud, I already knew. I wasn't staying for the restaurant. I was staying for her. When the last glass had been dried and set in its place, I expected she would thank me, maybe tease me again for overstaying, and send me on my way. But instead, she paused, leaning her palms against the counter, studying me with that steady, unreadable gaze. You can't leave without trying something proper, she said at last. Not just a bite from the kitchen window. Sit. It wasn't a request. It was the quiet command of someone who owned the room, who knew exactly what she wanted to do. I obeyed, sliding into one of the corner tables. The restaurant was empty now, but it didn't feel hollow. The dim lights, the faint scent of roasted herbs still clinging to the air, the soft hum of music, it all gave the impression of an after-hours secret, like I was being let into a side of the place no one else got to see. From the kitchen came the rhythmic sounds of her work, the hiss of a pan meeting heat, the clink of utensils, the faint scrape of a knife across a board. I leaned back, letting the sounds wrap around me, realizing that I liked this view better than the one I'd had earlier as a customer. It was quieter, more personal, almost as though she was cooking just for me. When she finally emerged, she wasn't carrying a tray balanced with multiple plates. Just one dish, placed carefully in front of me. And then, to my surprise, she returned with 2 glasses of wine and set one beside me before sliding into the chair across. The gesture shifted everything. She wasn't the chef anymore, towering over the counter, separated by her role. She was a woman sitting across from me, sharing a table, and in that instant, it felt less like a restaurant and more like something far more intimate, a dinner for 2. This is my favorite, she said softly, nodding to the dish. Not the most complicated, not the most elegant. But sometimes the simplest flavors are the truest. I picked up my fork, but my eyes were drawn more to her than the food. She watched closely as I took the first bite, and before I could even react, she leaned forward, tasting from her own side of the plate. For a moment, our forks brushed, an accidental clink of metal on porcelain, and her lips curved into a quiet smile. The flavors were warm, balanced, comforting. But the truth was, I couldn't taste much beyond the steady awareness of her sitting so close, of her laughter lingering in the air, of the soft glow of the candle between us flickering against the curve of her cheek. This is incredible, I managed. She tilted her head, her eyes narrowing just slightly, like she was searching for whether I meant the food or something else. And maybe I wasn't even sure myself. We ate slowly, speaking in low tones. She told me about how the restaurant had once been nothing more than a dream, how she'd saved, struggled, fought to make it real. Her voice carried both pride and weariness, but there was a softness when she spoke about the journey, as if beneath the steel of her confidence lived someone who had carried it all alone for too long. And in that quiet, with wine in hand and the world outside fading into irrelevance, I realized what was happening. This wasn't just a shared meal. It was a moment she hadn't given to anyone else. A glimpse behind the wall she'd built. And I was the one sitting across, tasting not only her food, but a part of her she rarely offered. The wine between us had loosened something, not in a careless way, but in the kind that allows truths to slip through cracks. She swirled her glass slowly, watching the light catch against the rim, her expression thoughtful. "People think success feels glamorous," she said quietly, almost to herself. "But they don't see the nights I leave here with my hands raw from work, or the mornings when I question if it's worth it. Some days I'm proud. Other days—" She trailed off, shrugging one shoulder, her eyes drifting toward the empty room. "Other days, it feels like I've built myself a beautiful cage." Her words hung in the air, soft but heavy. For the first time tonight, I saw not just the confident chef who had commanded her space with ease, but the woman beneath, the one who carried exhaustion, solitude, and questions she rarely spoke aloud. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the table. "It is worth it. Every person who walks in here feels the care you put into this place. That's not a cage, it's a gift. Even if it costs you." Her eyes lifted to mine, and for a moment they glistened, not with tears, but with a depth that told me I had touched something raw and unguarded. She pressed her lips together, then laughed softly, shaking her head. "You shouldn't say things like that." "Why not?" "Because it makes me want to believe you." There was no script to follow, no clever response. The only thing I knew was that I couldn't let her retreat into self-doubt. So I reached across the table, slow enough to give her time to pull back if she wanted. My fingers found hers, resting lightly on the back of her hand. For a heartbeat she froze. I felt the hesitation in the stiffness of her fingers, the quickened pulse beneath her skin. But then, almost imperceptibly, her hand softened beneath mine. She didn't withdraw. Instead, she turned her palm upward, allowing my hand to fit against hers. Her thumb brushed across my knuckle in a slow, absent-minded circle, as though she was testing the comfort of letting me stay there. The touch was so small, so unassuming, yet it carried more weight than words ever could. Outside, rain began to fall, tapping gently against the window panes. The sound wrapped around us like a soft veil, making the room feel smaller, more intimate, like we had been sealed inside our own quiet world. She sighed, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's been a long time since I let anyone close enough to see this side of me." I squeezed her hand, not hard, just steady. "Then maybe it's about time someone did." She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes searching, almost conflicted. And yet, beneath the hesitation, there was something undeniable. A longing, restrained but real, flickering like the candle between us. We sat there, hands entwined, saying nothing. The silence wasn't empty, it was full, charged with everything we weren't ready to admit aloud. In that stillness, I realized this wasn't just a night of food and wine anymore. It was something more fragile. Something that could vanish if pushed too quickly. So I didn't push. I just held her hand and let her know, without words, that she wasn't alone. And somehow, I felt that was exactly what she needed. Part 5. The moment of hesitation. For a while, either of us moved. Her hand stayed in mine, her thumbs still tracing faint circles over my skin, though I wasn't sure she even realized she was doing it. It was instinct, unconscious, like her body had chosen closeness before her mind could catch up. The rain outside deepened, its rhythm steady against the glass. The candle on the table flickered, casting shadows that shifted across her face. She looked softer in that light, almost vulnerable, though her eyes still carried the strength I'd noticed from the start. But then, something changed. Maybe it was the way she caught herself leaning in too close, or the way silence began to stretch too long between us. She blinked, pulling her hand gently back as though waking from a spell. "You're too young to be wasting time here," she said suddenly, her voice steady but her tone a shade too sharp, like she needed the words to build a barrier. I let the words hang there. I could have argued, could have insisted, but I knew she didn't want debate, she wanted distance. Still, her eyes betrayed her. They lingered on me a second too long, glimmering with something her mouth tried to deny. Young doesn't mean blind, I said softly. I know what I see in front of me. Her lips pressed into a line. She tried to look away, busying her hands with the empty plate on the table, but the movement was rushed, nervous. When she stood, I noticed a faint tremor in her fingers as she carried it toward the counter. I didn't follow immediately. Instead, I watched her, noticing everything, the way her shoulders rose and fell a little too quickly, the flush that still lingered at her throat, the way she avoided looking back at me even though I could feel her awareness stretching between us like a taut string. Finally I stood, moving to where she stood at the counter. The air between us felt charged, heavy with all the things either of us wanted to admit. You don't have to do that, I said quietly, nodding toward the plate she was scrubbing a little too hard. She laughed, but it was brittle. What else am I supposed to do? Just stand here? I stepped closer, not enough to crowd her, but enough that I could feel the faint warmth radiating from her. Maybe just be here. With me. That stopped her. Her hands stilled on the plate, water dripping from her fingers. She didn't look at me right away, but I saw her shoulders soften, her breath catch. And when she finally turned, her eyes met mine with a mixture of defiance and longing. This is complicated, she whispered. I know, I replied. But complicated doesn't mean impossible. For a moment, it seemed like she might step back, retreat behind the walls she just rebuilt. But then her gaze drifted down, lingering on my mouth for a fraction of a second before returning to my eyes. It was only a glance. Just that. But it was enough to set my pulse racing, enough to make the air feel charged and unsteady. She broke the moment with a nervous laugh, drying her hands on a towel. You have no idea what you're asking for. Maybe not, I admitted. But I know what I'm feeling. She shook her head, half amused, half exasperated, but there was no denying the color in her cheeks or the softness in her voice when she finally said, You shouldn't make it so hard to walk away. The truth was, either of us wanted to. By the time the clock struck midnight, the restaurant had fallen completely still. The music had long since ended, the candles burned low, and the rain outside had quieted into a steady drizzle. She wiped her hands on a cloth, moving slowly, almost reluctantly, as though she was trying to find a reason to keep me there just a little longer. I should walk you to the door, she said finally, her voice soft, carrying the weight of an ending neither of us wanted. I nodded, but I didn't stand right away. Neither did she. For a moment, we both lingered where we were, suspended between staying and leaving. When I finally rose, she did too, and together we walked toward the entrance. Our steps were quiet on the wooden floor, the air between us thick with everything unspoken. I could feel her presence beside me, not just the brush of her shoulder, but the subtle awareness that followed every movement, every breath. At the door, she reached for the handle but paused, her hand resting against the cool metal. The night outside was dark, softened by the glow of street lamps reflecting off the wet pavement. The world felt hushed, as though it was waiting, just like us. I turned to her. Thank you, I said, my voice low but earnest. For tonight. For more than just the food. Her eyes lifted to mine, and something in her expression shifted. The guardedness she had tried to rebuild earlier faltered, replaced by a gentleness I hadn't seen before. She stepped closer, not much, just enough that I could feel the faint warmth of her body reach me. You have a way of making simple things sound different, she murmured. I smiled. Maybe that's because simple things mean the most. For a moment neither of us moved. Then, slowly, she lifted her hand and brushed a stray curl of hair from my forehead. It was such a small gesture, so ordinary, so natural, but the tenderness in it struck deeper than any words could. Her fingers lingered longer than necessary against my temple, her touch feather-light yet enough to send a current down my spine. I didn't move. I didn't want to break the spell. I just stood there, letting her hand rest against me, letting the silence fill with everything her gesture said without sound. Her eyes searched mine, and in that gaze I saw the battle she was fighting, The part of her that wanted to step back, to protect herself, and the part that wanted, just as much as I did, to stay in this moment. The drizzle outside carried the faint scent of rain through the open door, cool and fresh, contrasting with the warmth radiating from her. For a heartbeat, the world felt balanced on that fragile line between restraint and surrender. But she didn't lean in. Neither did I. We didn't need to. The closeness, the stillness, the way her hand brushed lightly against my skin, it was already enough to say everything we couldn't. Finally, she pulled her hand back, slowly, almost reluctantly. "Good night," she whispered, though her voice carried the weight of unfinished words. I nodded, stepping into the night. But the memory of her touch lingered, warmer than the lights behind me, stronger than the cool air around me. And I knew, whatever this was, whatever name it might eventually take, tonight wasn't an ending. It was only the beginning. The rain had slowed to a drizzle by the time I stepped outside, yet I found myself hesitating on the sidewalk, reluctant to leave the glow of her restaurant behind me. Through the glass, I could still see her, moving quietly, blowing out the last candle, her expression softened now that she thought no one was watching. I almost walked away. Almost. But then the door opened again, and she stepped out into the cool night, pulling her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. Her eyes met mine with a flicker of surprise, then something gentler, something that told me she wasn't disappointed to find me still there. "You didn't go," she said softly, her breath clouding faintly in the air. I gave a half-smile. "Maybe I was waiting for dessert." Her laugh was quiet, shaking her head at me, but her lips curved with warmth. She came closer, her heels clicking lightly against the wet pavement until she was only a step away. The street lamp above us cast a halo over her hair, making her look almost unreal, like she'd stepped out of the glow of her own kitchen and into some place more intimate, more ours. "Next time," she began, her voice low, her gaze lingering on mine, "maybe I'll let you try something sweeter." Her words carried more than one meaning, and we both knew it. Neither of us needed to explain. I felt myself smile, slower this time, deeper. "Then I guess I'll have to come back." "You'd better." She said it with mock sternness, but her eyes softened as the words left her, like she was already imagining what next time might look like. For a moment, we just stood there, the drizzle tapping gently around us, the night quiet except for our breaths. And then her hand moved, hesitant at first, but steady once she reached me. Her fingers brushed mine, light as a whisper, then slid between them. The touch wasn't bold. It wasn't claiming or rushed. It was simple. Honest. But it held more promise than any kiss could have in that moment. I looked down at our joined hands, then back up at her. "I don't think I'll forget tonight." Her thumb traced slowly across my skin, and she gave me a look that was both strong and impossibly tender. "Neither will I." The drizzle continued, cool against my face, yet all I felt was the warmth of her hand in mine. It wasn't about grand gestures or declarations. It was about this, the quiet certainty that something had begun between us, fragile yet undeniable, like a spark that had been waiting for the right moment to catch. Finally, she gave my hand a gentle squeeze before stepping back, her smile lingering in the soft glow of the street lamp. "Go on, before you catch cold. I'll see you soon." I nodded, though leaving felt harder than it should have. As I walked away, I glanced back once, catching her still standing there, watching me with that same expression, half resolved, half hopeful, but entirely hers. And as the night closed around me, I realized I wasn't just hungry for her cooking anymore. I was hungry for her. For the warmth of her presence, the quiet strength in her laughter, the way her touch could steady me and unsteady me all at once. Tonight had been a taste. But what lingered was the promise of something more.